Welcome to Hope Natural Health, the podcast inspiring you to be your best version. Join me, your host, Dr. Erin, naturopathic doctor, dog mom, cancer survivor, and girl boss weekly as we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Welcome back, everyone, to a fresh new episode. I first want to apologize for the delay in some release of podcast episodes. We had some technical difficulties and have to actually re-record some. So apologize for the missing out on some episodes the last few weeks, but we're back. Last episode that aired, we talked about sugar swaps. So make sure you take a listen to that if you're curious about how to get less sugar in your life. But now let's dive into this week's episode. I have a guest here. Marc Mclean is a health and wellness journalist based in Dumbarton, Scotland. So he's way far away from us. So I'm super excited that he's here. He's author of the gut healing book, More Than a Gut Feeling. And he also hosts the For Gut's Sake podcast, which is dedicated to helping people reverse ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and IBS. Marc has been a professional journalist for the past 22 years and was forced to use those skills in an unexpected way when his gut health collapsed. He spent the best part of a decade researching alternative health and discovering the truth behind his digestive problems to finally heal. Marc is now passionate about sharing holistic healing information and interviewing people on his podcast who have also proved medics wrong and reversed their serious gut conditions. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Very comprehensive. I'm really honoured to be on, Erin. I'm a big fan of naturopathic doctors and the way you guys work, so it's great to be here.
Good. Well, I'm excited for this, and let's dive in. First, tell me a little bit more about really your background, like when you, over 22 years ago when your gut health collapsed. Like, tell the audience a little bit about what happened and how you turned your own health journey into a passion.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I work professionally as a journalist. That's been my career in the media for the past 20 years. But halfway through that career, it was back in 2010, my gut health basically completely collapsed almost overnight. And it was a complete surprise to me because I was always like a gym fanatic, looked after my body. I hardly drank alcohol, didn't smoke. It just made no sense. And on my trip to the doctor that day, he says to me, "You've got IBS and here's some pills. You'll have to take these. Come back in a month for more." So I was like, well, why do I need to come back for more? Surely these will do the job and I'll be okay. How long will I have to take them for? And he said, for the rest of your life. So that just blew my mind. It made zero sense for all those reasons I just explained to you. So I had that option of taking these pills for the next 50 years or going down a rabbit hole and finding out the answers, the root causes to these gut problems myself. Mm-hmm. That's the road I went down. It was a lot longer than I thought it would take. It was the best part of a decade figuring out exactly what was going on, because further down the line, I was then later diagnosed with severe ulcerative colitis. So the IBS, I got control of that. Things were okay for a few years, and then further down the line, I was diagnosed with severe ulcerative colitis. So it's been a long journey, but I'm now 5 years medication free, healed myself naturally, and I'm so passionate just about sharing what I learned and helping other people who have experienced similar issues overcome their gut health problems.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of people that suffer from gut collapsing. I like how you say that, and gut disorders and gut something. As naturopathic doctors, we're always looking at the gut because it's really a foundation to health. And if your gut's not healthy, you're not going to be healthy. I mean, 80% of your immune system's in your gut. So we really need to focus on that. So what do you consider, a gut health epidemic, and what are the real reasons behind it? I'm sure in your practice now, you've seen so many people suffer from, gut collapse. So what do you think the truth is behind that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And gut epidemic, I've said that before on my own podcast, and it sounds a wee bit dramatic, but I don't think it is, because I think just about everyone listening to this right now will either have a friend or a relative that's got gut issues, whether that's heartburn, diarrhea, chronic constipation. We all know someone with gut issues. And the stats back this up as well. It's 2/3 of Americans have a digestive issue. The number one cause for hospitalizations in the US is gut issues. And here in the UK, there's like 10 to 12 million people have got IBS. So to me, that is a gut epidemic. It definitely is. Now, there are some underlying reasons which I believe are behind this explosion of gut health problems, which the general public don't really know about. So we've got the obvious ones where we're all eating a ridiculously bad diet these days. Well, the majority of people are 80% of the garbage on supermarket shelves is just processed stuff. We've got high sugar foods, highly inflammatory foods. We know what that does to the body. But then there are some other issues which I came across in my own journey, which a lot of people don't know about. And one of those is environmental toxins, heavy metal toxicity. I was basically mercury poisoned, had high levels of mercury within my body, and that just wrecks the digestive tract. And we've got these heavy metals, and they're in our water. Depending where you are in the world, it can be in your water, it can be in food. The products we have at home filled with all sorts of chemicals, plastics, all of this stuff accumulates in the body, and over time, that's going to interfere with the running of the body and your digestive system. So that's one major issue. Another one is stress. Now, not just normal, mental, everyday stress that you get, but there's underlying emotional stress that a lot of people are not really aware of. So that can be ranging from baggage you've had from childhood. It can be quite deep stuff at times. It could be at an underlying level causing this low-grade inflammation that just keeps repeating. We can have it where maybe someone's gone through a divorce or a bereavement, which was in my case, that really triggered off the ulcerative colitis. People don't often tie in the emotional stress with what's going on in their gut. And it's been shown in the research that emotional stress can almost wipe out the good bacteria in your stomach.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you touched on IBS, ulcerative colitis. Can you touch a little bit on what's the difference between, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and IBS? You said you started with IBS, but I'm wondering if, too, you had the ulcerative colitis, or is like IBS, I know the answer to this, but I like, since you're the professional in this, is ulcerative colitis or IBS like the big umbrella, and then you can have these different, more streamlined diagnoses. So tell us a little bit about the difference between those and how you really would start approaching, testing for a diagnosis of one of those.
Yeah, and I think you termed that properly with IBS. It is more of an umbrella term for a lot of symptoms rather than just a specific diagnosis. Having spoken to many other experts on my podcast, they do say that quite often medical doctors will give a diagnosis of IBS for things like chronic constipation to the other end of the spectrum, diarrhea, heartburn, when they've really not got the root cause answers to it. They'll just give that name to it. Mm-hmm. But when you're dealing with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, they are more serious. We're dealing with serious inflammation. With ulcerative colitis, that's more to do with the large intestine, the colon being inflamed, whereas Crohn's disease can affect any part of the digestive tract. It's more wider, but they do have similar symptoms where you can be passing blood and mucus, just really delightful stuff, weight loss, fatigue, really struggling with burning in the guts and terrible reactions to foods. I don't know exactly what the situation is in the US, but certainly for those type of diagnoses, here for colitis and Crohn's, you would have to be referred by your doctor to a GI clinic where you would get like a colonoscopy. That's what happened for me. I had maybe, over my journey, I've had 4 or 5 colonoscopies, which were not much fun. and that was when I got the diagnosis for colitis.
Okay. What's the difference between IBS and IBD?
what basically the inflammation. There's high levels of inflammation with the inflammatory bowel disease, and it is considered a more serious condition. Certainly, there's a lot more prevalence of IBS because it's that umbrella term and it takes in so many different symptoms. IBD isn't quite as common, but it's more serious.
Okay. And then, shoot, what was I going to say? Oh, with your journey and how you had the IBS and then, later diagnosis of ulcerative colitis, you were more focused on the why. So you touched a little bit on the heavy metals that could be causing it. So if anyone is struggling or has digestive complaints, the constipation or the diarrhea, the pain, fatigue, where do you recommend that they start? And maybe they've gotten a diagnosis of IBS. Like, what can you tell someone, to look further, or that you can heal your gut, or what are your recommendations for someone that might be struggling with this?
Well, a big message that I always try to put across on the podcast is that people, they've got more power than they believe. We live in this mainstream medical world where we give a lot of respect to the people in the white coats, and we listen to their opinion, and obviously they go through like 6 years of medical training, but they've only got like 10-15 minutes to spend with you in that consultation. You've got all the time in the world to dedicate to your wellness. And just because they give you that diagnosis, that doesn't have to be your fate. It doesn't mean that you have to stick with that and that you're powerless. And that's one of the main reasons I get so many other people on the podcast to share their stories, because the stories are all different. There's not just one way to heal colitis. There's not just one way to heal Crohn's. There are various different avenues we can go down. The alternative health space is huge, as you know, and it's just letting people know that we're in this digital world where we can do our own research, we can take charge of our own health, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. And I do think it's really powerful to go seeking those really positive stories. They give you hope. They give you hope. They give you ideas. And it shows you that quite often the doctor's not always right.
Yeah. What prompted your testing for the heavy metals? I'm just curious how that all came about.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was by pure chance, and it was through a podcast, actually. I was listening to a Tony Robbins podcast, and he had on Dr. Marc Mclean, the functional medicine doctor, obviously well respected in the US. And I was listening to him, and he was talking about how a lot of his patients he was dealing with these days, they had heavy metal toxicity, and it kind of caught my attention. And I was like cleaning the house, just had this on in the background, and then he started talking about the silver fillings in your teeth, how these are 50% mercury. People don't know this. They're 50% mercury, and people are absorbing these mercury vapors, and that's accumulating in the body. It's interfering with the workings of their cells, and then they're developing all sorts of conditions. And he was saying that was just a huge issue in his practice. And at that moment, a light bulb went off in my head, because I was like, wait a minute here. I went up to the bathroom, opened my mouth, and I had 5 huge silver fillings. And I knew when I had got them, Erin, I had got them when I was a teenager. So at that point, they had been in my mouth for 25 years. And it just made me think about how much of these toxic heavy metals, how much of the mercury vapors I had absorbed over that time. And then again, I just had to get pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. I was going into Facebook forums who were these people who were so clued up on detoxifying the body from these toxic heavy metals. And they recommended a lab in LA to send away for testing to this lab in LA. The results come back in about 2 weeks, and I'll be honest, when the results came back, I had no clue what I was reading. There was all these different measurements, all these mineral levels. I had no clue, so I uploaded them to the group. The admins, all the moderators on the group were like, "This screams mercury poisoning. You need to do some serious detoxification work," which I did over the next 18 months, and then gradually my health did begin to improve.
Wow. So did you get the fillings removed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me. I
Yeah.
that this is an important point to make. So, in case anyone's listening now and they think, "God, I've got these silver fillings, I'm going to run to the dentist and get them taken out." You need to stop and don't do that. There's a proper process that has to be done. They have to be removed safely
Mm-hmm.
by a biological dentist,
Mm-hmm.
um, um, and it's done through what's called a SMART protocol.
Mm.
Safe mercury amalgam removal technique, SMART protocol. So that cost me, I think it was around £3,000, and I had to do over several appointments, and you wouldn't believe it. See the scene in the dentist that day. The guy came in and he literally looked like a spaceman. He was covered
Yeah.
head to toe in this white suit, like a mask on.
Mm-hmm.
He did not want to touch or be anywhere near this mercury. And they had like a dam inside my mouth so that when they were drilling it out, like slowly and safely, I didn't swallow any of it, because
Right.
if I did, that it could have caused all sorts of neurological problems. So that was all
Wow.
done safely. It was done over the space of maybe a couple of months, and I'm so glad I done it. So yeah, that was the first step, and then I worked on gradually detoxifying the what was left over in my body, and that was done over about 18 months.
What kind of processes did you do for that? Did you have to do chelation, or was it all just, binders or things like that? What was your protocol?
It, I avoided chelation. The chelation is the number one.
Mm-hmm.
The number one answer that a lot of people do. There were a few downsides to that, which kind of put me off. People were in the Facebook group were talking about the reactions they were having, and I just thought it sounded a little bit risky. So what I decided to do was, yes, I mixed some binders, but also sauna therapy,
Mm-hmm.
infrared saunas, like a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And I was also drinking these green drinks which detoxify and pull these
Mm-hmm.
metals out of your system. Things like spirulina,
Mm-hmm.
cilantro, um, Atlantic dulse, like seaweed. All of these
Mm.
things mixed in smoothies, and I was doing a mix of all of those. And further down the line, I just knew it was working because I was feeling lighter. I had more energy,
Mm.
less fatigued. My complexion was better. My energy levels were better. I knew it was working, definitely.
That's insane. All from
Yeah.
fillings. What did you have any other metals come up on your test, or was that test only for mercury?
No. There was various. It was for various different heavy metals. There was one other one that was quite high as well. I'm trying to remember. Can't remember off the top of my
Okay.
head. There was one more, but the main one was mercury.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, not awesome, but I love how you brought up sauna. All of my viewers on Instagram know that I love a sauna. I have my own infrared because I'm obsessed with it. So even if you don't have or know that you have any sort of heavy metals, we all have some toxicity just because of our environment, like you touched on in the beginning. But that's why I love infrared, just to detox and sweat and get stuff out. So I love that you had sauna therapy as part of your protocol. It's wonderful. When you said a lot, did you do it? Was it like every day?
I was in maybe 4 days a week.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not as lucky as you to have one at home. I was having to go to
Yeah.
the local spa and use it there. But I actually fell in love with it. I
Yeah.
love the sauna. I just find it so relaxing. It's
Oh, yeah.
almost. I'm one of those people. I can't meditate. I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
My head's too busy. I can't get into meditation. But when I go in the sauna, I can relax so easily.
Yeah. My dog loves it. He gets excited to go in the sauna. He's just waits there for me to open the door, and then he runs and jumps up on the bench, and then he'll kick himself out in about 10 minutes. It's hilarious.
Oh,
He
that's
loves
so
it.
funny.
Yeah, it's so good for you. You also mentioned too the whole mental, emotional component to the gut, and you said that you had bereavement. So it someone passed away, and this probably jump started the whole, gut collapse. So can you talk about a little bit how the emotions really do impact the gut, and how do they, quote unquote, steal all of the good bacteria, or your emotions or stress steal the good bacteria in your gut? I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I mentioned earlier, it became clear to me early on that mainstream medicine is very two-dimensional. We're focusing on the physical and mental aspects of health, but you and I both know there's that emotional health element and spiritual health. We're so much more than that. And for me, it was almost just like life circumstances showed me that direct connection between my emotional health and my gut health. Firstly, when I had all the IBS stuff, things would always get really bad. If there was stuff going on in my family, I remember I had a breakup with a girlfriend. When that breakup happened, my gut health went like that. It was just really, really bad. Things got desperately worse. If there was stuff going on within my family, rocky things, arguments happening, gut health would go down again. But then for a few years, things were on an even keel. But around the fall of 2017, I started passing blood in the toilet, and then I started passing mucus, and then I was losing a lot of weight, and all sorts of things were going through my head. I was like, have I got cancer here? Is it colon cancer? So I was really worrying about it all. I was going over it all in my head. But around the same time as all of these symptoms coming up, my dad was really ill. My dad was an alcoholic, and he was really struggling with it. And it became apparent to me that it was going downhill rapidly. I just instinctively knew he didn't have long to go. And I really I was scrambling around trying to help him with all the knowledge I knew about nutrition and everything. I was getting him like these high quality vitamins and minerals. I was bringing him in healthy groceries, trying to get him to eat, build up his body. But at the same time, I intuitively knew that I think he's not got that long to go. So then I was worrying about my mum, how my mum would cope. I was basically projecting into the future, and I began to get really stressed. Things were in this vicious cycle. And then come 2 weeks before Christmas, my dad died. And when he died, things just got really bad. It was all on me to organise the funeral. It was just before Christmas. My mum was in bits, and I just was almost like in autopilot, but I was really struggling at the same time. After Christmas was done, I went to the doctor. At that point, I was passing blood like 15 times a day in the toilet. I'd lost so much weight. He sent me very quickly to the hospital, and normally these colonoscopies, they would take maybe like 15 minutes. I was dreading it, and within like 2 minutes of them doing their thing with the camera, they're like, yep, we know what this is. You've got severe ulcerative colitis. So I had no clue what that was. But I was told that this is incurable. We've got this medication we can give you, anti-inflammatory medication. It works in like 70% of cases. You'll have to take it for the rest of your life. It was all very similar to what I'd heard with IBS. You have to take this medication forever. At that point, I was just happy to get the medication. I just wanted to get back to normal. But it still didn't sit right with me that I'd need to take it for the rest of my life. Now, long story short, and getting back to the question you asked, the emotional impact and the tie between gut health, what I've learned is that number one, and I've read this through various books, some health experts say that there's an emotional root cause in about 90% of physical health issues. There's an amazing book called The Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. He delves right into all of this stuff. It's really, really powerful. There was another really good book I read, which is along the same lines, called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. Same kind of lesson, that emotional issues are often at the root of many of our symptoms and our gut issues, and people don't realise this. And you had also asked about how this then affects the gut. All I do know is that the science has shown when you're under emotional stress, number one, there's a huge release of cortisol in the body, and the cortisol, the stress hormone, if there's too much of that, it breaks down the body. And then secondly, it also negatively affects the gut microbiome. I don't know exactly how that happens. I'm not a scientist. It's just the research has shown when you're under tough times of emotional stress, the gut microbiome just gets completely messed up. And then when that happens, you're going to have real problems digesting your food, dealing with bacteria, and then things end up in a bit of a mess.
Well, it makes sense because every time we go through something, we always get really nervous. We feel the butterflies in our stomach. We might have looser bowel movements, things like that. So I don't even know really the scientific, explanation to how it impacts that, but it makes sense. I mean, just because there's the huge gut-brain connection. So we all know that that's related. And then, if, obviously the stress is a huge, huge component to so many health concerns. So that's quite the adventure you had. Now back to, you said you've been medication free for 5 years. Ulcerative colitis is something that is incurable, however manageable, correct? So have you noticed, I mean, this was what, 2017 that it all came to fruition? Is that right? 2017?
Yeah, so it was just at the beginning of 2018 I was diagnosed, and then around 9 months later, through various different methods, I was able to taper off my medication, and I've never
perfect.
been back on it since.
And have you had any flares or any issues since then? Wow.
None.
How do you manage everything now? Because it's, your gut is very sensitive. So I'm sure you've been through some emotional things and stress, for the last 5 years. We all do. So what are your best tips for, overcoming something like that and then managing it moving forward?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say before I do dive into this, Erin, is the whole incurable thing can be quite controversial, because on the podcast, I've had people on who have been sharing their stories of how they've reversed colitis, how they've reversed Crohn's. And I've had some negative feedback from people saying to me, well, you don't know they're cured. All their symptoms could come back, all of this kind of stuff. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is a cure-all. I'm not saying I have the answers for cure. But what I do say is people have the power within themselves to reverse their symptoms. They can reverse them, they can manage them, and they can keep in control of them. Now, one of the main things I always tell people in relation to these inflammatory bowel disorders is that if we focus on the inflammation and natural ways to bring that down, then it makes sense that the symptoms can fall away. Now, one of the most powerful steps that I took to reduce the inflammation was the Wim Hof method. Have you heard of the Wim Hof method?
The breathing?
Now, yeah. So the breath work, which is based on ancient pranayama-based breath work, they've been using it for thousands of years. Now, the Wim Hof method, there's several elements to it. So there's cold water exposure, where people are getting in cold showers and all of this stuff. That puts people off. They don't want to do that. but the breath work on its own is very powerful. When you take in all of that oxygen, so often and then you do the breath hold at the end of it, that then creates this state called intermittent hypoxia. Now, again, I'm not a scientist, but what I've learned at a basic level is that floods the cells with oxygen, and that then lowers inflammation at a cellular level. So it's really, really powerful. And it also, when you're flooding the cells with all that oxygen, it's then fighting bacteria as well. So that is then fighting this war for you on two different fronts. Just that breath work alone, and it's free. You can do this every day, 10 minutes at a time. I did it twice per day, and within 2 to 3 weeks, my symptoms started falling away, and my mind was blown. And I'm not the only one who's done this. I've come across other people. I've interviewed them on my podcast who rave about this breath work. So that was number one. Then obviously, detoxifying the body, getting out those heavy metals, that's going to help with the inflammation process as well. And then thirdly, it's just, obviously, diet's important. You need to cut out the inflammatory foods. So that means like the high sugar foods. A lot of people won't like to hear it, but dairy is not great. It's highly inflammatory. And gluten's an inflammatory food as well. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a saint. I'll still have some of the treats at the weekend. I just try to do it Monday to Friday, keep my diet clean, cut out those inflammatory foods, and all of that stuff combined, and some other stuff that I couldn't cover in this one episode. All of that keeps the symptoms at bay, and it has kept me healthy and medication free all of this time.
That's amazing. And most of that is free, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you
absolutely.
You're in charge of choosing what you eat. Your breath doesn't cost you any money. I mean, maybe you need to figure out if you have some heavy metals. That would be really the only expense, but wonderful. Well, Marc, we could probably talk for hours about gut health. I love it. It's so important. That's why I wanted you on the show. But we'll wrap this up with one final question I ask all my podcast guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, I like this question, and I think you're going to like the answer. Sauna.
Yeah.
Use. Definitely sauna use, and you know just as well as I do, it's so good for detoxifying the body. Science has shown it gets these heavy metals out, gets out all of the other junk that we're absorbing in this toxic 21st century world we're living in. It helps you de-stress. It's just awesome. I love it.
Yeah. Detox, stress. It's good for your skin. It's good for your immune system. It's good for you name it. Like, I mean, if you don't follow me, start following me. You'll see me in the sauna all the time, and I'll share my dogs in there with me. And we just love the sauna. So highly recommend it. Awesome, Marc. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we sign off?
The only thing I would say is I covered the main things for helping people reverse those symptoms. But if there's anyone listening now who are maybe dealing with colitis, IBS or anything, I've got a free ebook on my website which goes into a lot more of it and explains this stuff in a lot more detail. So if they visit www.forgutsake.org, they can download that for free, and it goes into a lot more detail for them.
Wonderful. And we'll, of course, have that linked in the show notes. So again, thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we will see everyone again next week. Take care.